The smoke still clung to the charred timbers like a ghost that refused to leave. And Nora Kendall sat on the dirt floor cradling two crying babies against her chest, wondering if God had finally turned his back on her completely. Her dress was stained with soot and milk. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her face, and the November wind of 1878 whistled through the burned-out gaps in what had once been the cabin walls. The roof had partially collapsed on the eastern side, leaving half the structure open to the gray Utah sky, and every gust sent ash swirling through the air like black snow. She had been 22 years old when she married Thomas Kendall 3 years ago, full of hope and dreams about their future in Silver Reef, Utah Territory, where silver had been discovered in the sandstone, defying everything geologists thought they knew. Thomas had been a miner, a good man with strong hands and a gentle smile, and they had built this cabin together on the outskirts of town where the land was cheap, and the view stretched for miles across the red rock country. Then the fever had come. Thomas died 6 weeks ago, leaving her alone with 3-month-old twins, a boy and a girl she had named Samuel and Sarah. The neighbors had helped at first, bringing food and offering condolences, but Silver Reef was a mining town where everyone struggled to survive, and charity only stretched so far. Then 3 nights ago, she had fallen asleep with the lamp burning, exhausted from feeding the babies, and she woke to flames crawling up the curtains like demons ascending from hell. She had grabbed the twins and run into the night, screaming for help that came too late. By the time the neighbors arrived with buckets, half the cabin had been consumed. They managed to save part of it, but what remained was barely shelter. The bed was gone, the stove damaged, most of their supplies destroyed. The neighbors had looked at her with pity and something else, something that said they had done all they could, and she should not expect more. That was 3 days ago, and she had been living in the ruins since, huddling with the babies under the one blanket she had managed to save, feeding them and trying to keep them warm as the Utah winter approached. She had perhaps 2 weeks of food left if she rationed carefully. No money, no husband, no family within 500 miles. Her parents were dead. Thomas's family back in Missouri had never approved of the marriage, and she had nowhere to go and no way to get there even if she did. Samuel started crying harder, his little face scrunched up and red, and Sarah joined him in a chorus of infant misery that echoed through the burned shell of her home. Nora felt tears slide down her own cheeks, hot against her cold skin, and she rocked them both, humming a hymn her mother had taught her, trying to find comfort in melody when there was none to be found in circumstance. That was when she heard the horse. The hoofbeats came slow and steady up the path that led to the cabin, and Nora's heart seized with sudden fear. A woman alone was vulnerable in ways that went beyond poverty, and she had nothing worth stealing except the 2 things she would die to protect. She pulled the babies closer and looked around for something she could use as a weapon, but there was nothing within reach except a piece of charred wood. The rider came into view through the gap where the door used to hang, and Nora found herself looking up at a man on a buckskin horse. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn brown coat and a hat that had seen better days. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days of stubble, and his eyes were a striking gray-green that took in the scene before him with an expression she could not quite read. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who did not want to frighten her. That small courtesy made something in Nora's chest loosen just slightly. "Madam," he said, and his voice was deep and rough like gravel in a stream. "Name's Graham Morrison. I was passing through and saw the state of your place from the road. He gestured to the burned cabin, his expression troubled. "Looks like you have had some fierce bad luck." Nora tried to straighten her spine, to summon some dignity despite sitting in the ruins of her life with 2 screaming babies and ash in her hair. "We are managing," she said, and hated how her voice shook. Graham Morrison looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been recognition or memory or simple human compassion. "Madam, with respect, you are not managing. You are freezing in a burned-out cabin with 2 infants and winter coming on hard." He paused, seemed to consider his words. "I am a carpenter by trade before I took to cowboying. I could help if you would allow it." "I cannot pay you," Nora said immediately, because pride was sometimes all a person had left. "Did not ask you to," Graham replied simply. He tied his horse to the remains of the porch post and walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "I have some supplies on my horse. Tools. I was heading down to Arizona to find work, but I reckon I could spare a few days to make this place livable before I go. Would not sit right with me, leaving a woman and babies like this." Nora wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, to prove she could handle this herself. But Samuel was crying himself hoarse, and Sarah's little lips were tinged blue from the cold, and the truth was she could not do this alone. She had been trying for 3 days and she was failing. "Why?" she asked, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Why would you help us?" Graham was quiet for a moment, and something painful flickered across his face. "I had a sister once. She died with her baby, both of them, because there was not anyone around who knew how to help when things went wrong with the birth. I was working cattle 3 territories away and did not even know until I got the letter saying she was already buried." He met her eyes. "I figure maybe if somebody had stopped to help her, they would both still be here. So I am stopping now." The simple honesty in his words broke something in Nora, and she found herself nodding, tears flowing freely now. "All right," she whispered. "All right, yes, thank you." Graham nodded once and went back to his horse, returning with a heavy canvas pack and a bedroll. "First things first," he said. "You and those babies need somewhere warm to sleep tonight. I am going to rig up a proper shelter inside here, block off the worst of the wind. Then tomorrow I will start on repairs proper." He worked quickly and efficiently, moving through the cabin wreckage with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He found the least damaged corner, used some of the fallen timbers to create a frame, and stretched his canvas tarp over it to make a small enclosed space. Then he retrieved another blanket from his pack and spread it on the ground inside. "This will keep the heat in better," he said. "I've got a small camp stove in my gear. We can set it up in here, get you all warmed up and cook something hot." Within an hour, Nora was sitting in relative warmth with the babies, watching as Graham Morrison set up the little portable stove and started heating water for coffee. The difference was remarkable. With the wind blocked and the stove radiating heat, the babies finally stopped crying and settled into drowsy contentment against her chest. Graham made coffee and produced some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering it to her without ceremony. Nora realized she had not eaten anything but stale bread in 2 days, and she accepted gratefully, trying not to let him see how her hands shook as she took the food. They sat in awkward silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the small fire in the stove and the soft breathing of the babies. Nora watched Graham over the rim of her tin cup, studying him in the lamplight. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with strong, capable hands and a quiet manner that made her feel safe rather than threatened. There was something sad in his eyes, though, some old grief that she recognized because she carried it too. "How long ago?" she asked finally. "Your sister," 2 years, Graham said quietly. Her name was Grace. She was 19. I am sorry, Nora said and meant it. Graham just nodded, staring into his coffee. After a moment he asked, Your husband? 6 weeks ago, fever. The twins were only 6 weeks old when he passed. Nora looked down at the sleeping babies in her arms. The fire happened because I was so tired I fell asleep with the lamp lit. I keep thinking if I had just been more careful, if I had just stayed awake a few more minutes. Fire could have happened 100 different ways, Graham said firmly. You cannot blame yourself for being human and needing sleep. You are doing the best you can in circumstances that would break most people. His words were kind, but Nora was not sure she believed them. She had failed at so many things lately. Failed to keep her husband alive, failed to keep their home safe, failed to provide for her children. The weight of it pressed on her shoulders like a physical thing. Where is your family? Graham asked. Anyone who could help? Both my parents died before I married. Thomas's family did not approve of me, said I was not good enough, that I had no dowry worth mentioning. Nora tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. Thomas did not care about that. He loved me anyway. But his family has not written since he died, and I would rather freeze than beg them for anything. Graham's expression hardened slightly. Some people do not deserve the family they are given, he said, but that does not mean you have to face this alone. I do not have much choice, Nora said softly. You have got one now, Graham replied. I am going to fix this place up proper, make it safe and warm before winter sets in hard. That is my choice, and you already said yes, so you are stuck with my help whether you like it or not. Despite everything, Nora felt the corner of her mouth twitch in something that might have been the beginning of a smile. You are very stubborn, Mr. Morrison. Graham, he corrected. And yes, madam, I am. It is one of my better qualities. That night, Graham insisted on sleeping outside the canvas shelter, giving Nora and the babies privacy and all the blankets except one. She protested, but he was immovable on the subject, and she was too exhausted to argue much. She lay in the makeshift shelter with Samuel and Sarah tucked close on either side, warmer than she had been in days, and listened to the sound of Graham settling down on the other side of the canvas. For the first time since the fire, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the gaps in the burned cabin, and Nora woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She sat up carefully, trying not to wake the babies, and peered out of the shelter to find Graham already up and cooking breakfast on his camp stove. Morning, he said when he noticed her. Figured you could use a proper meal. Bacon and beans, nothing fancy, but it will stick to your ribs. You did not have to, Nora began, but Graham waved her off. Had to eat anyway. Making enough for two is not much harder than making it for one. He dished up a generous portion onto a tin plate and handed it to her. Eat up. You are going to need your strength. Why? Nora asked, accepting the plate. Because I am going to need your help with some of this, Graham said matter-of-factly. I can do the heavy work and the skilled carpentry, but there is going to be measuring and holding things steady, and a dozen other tasks that go faster with two people. The babies will sleep some of the day, I figure, and we can work while they do. Nora blinked at him. She had assumed he would do the work while she stayed out of the way with the children. The idea that he wanted her help, that he saw her as useful rather than just a victim to be rescued, stirred something in her that had been dormant since Thomas died. All right, she said. Tell me what you need. They fell into a routine over the next few days that felt almost natural despite how strange the circumstances were. Graham would wake early and get the fire going, make coffee and start breakfast while Nora fed the babies. After they ate, they would work together on the cabin repairs while Samuel and Sarah slept in a makeshift cradle Graham had constructed from a crate and some soft blankets. The first priority was making the structure sound. Graham worked with an efficiency that spoke of years of experience, replacing the burned beams and shoring up the walls. He rode into Silver Reef on the second day and came back with a wagon full of lumber, nails, and supplies. "How did you pay for all this?" Nora asked, worried and confused. "Sold my saddle," Graham said simply, unloading the wood. "Horse does not mind, and I can get another saddle down the road. You cannot get another roof, and these babies need one." Nora felt her throat tighten. "Graham, you cannot just sell your things for us. That saddle was worth good money." "Was my choice to make," Graham said, not looking at her as he hefted a beam onto his shoulder. "Money is only worth what you spend it on, and I reckon this is worth it. Now come hold this steady while I nail it in place." Nora wanted to argue, but she could see from the set of his jaw that it would be pointless. Graham Morrison had decided he was going to help them, and apparently nothing she said was going to change that. So instead she helped him hold the beam, and then the next one, and the one after that. And slowly the cabin began to look like a home again instead of a catastrophe. In the evenings they would sit by the stove and talk while the babies nursed or slept. Graham told her about growing up in Texas, about learning carpentry from his father and cattle work from his uncles. He spoke about the places he had been, drifting from job to job across the territories, never quite finding a place that felt like home after his father died, and the family ranch was sold to pay debts. Nora told him about her childhood in Kansas, about meeting Thomas at a church social and falling in love with his quiet steadiness. She spoke about the hope they had felt coming to Utah territory, about the dreams they had built together in this cabin that now seemed both very close and impossibly far away. "He would have liked you," Nora said one evening, surprising herself with the words. "Thomas, I mean. He valued hard work and honesty. You would have been friends, I think." Graham was quiet for a moment, whittling a piece of wood by lamplight. He was making toys for the babies, little carved animals that were beginning to take shape under his knife. "I wish I could have met him," he said finally. "Takes a good man to build a life out here to take care of a family. You were lucky to have him, even if it was not for long enough." "I was," Nora agreed softly. "I still am lucky, I suppose. He gave me Samuel and Sarah. And he taught me that there are good men in the world, which makes it a little easier to trust that you are one too." Graham looked up at that, meeting her eyes across the small space. Something passed between them in that moment, some unspoken understanding, and Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked away quickly, suddenly flustered in a way she had not expected. By the end of the first week, the cabin had walls again and most of a roof. Graham worked from dawn until well after dark, and Nora helped as much as she could while caring for the twins. She found herself watching him when he was not looking, noticing the way his muscles moved under his shirt when he lifted heavy beams, the concentration on his face when he measured and cut boards, the gentleness in his hands when he occasionally picked up one of the babies to give her a rest. He was handsome, she realized with a start of guilt. Handsome and kind and capable, and she was a widow who had no business noticing such things about a man who was only helping her out of charity. But it did not feel like charity. Graham treated her like a partner in the work, asking her opinion on where things should go, teaching her how to measure properly and explaining why he made the choices he did. He talked to her like an equal, not like a helpless woman who needed to be managed or pitied. "Why are you not married?" Nora asked one afternoon, then immediately wished she could take the words back. "I am sorry, that was rude. It is none of my business." Graham paused in his hammering and gave her a slight smile. "It is all right, fair question, I suppose." He went back to work, speaking between hammer blows. "Came close once." Girl named Rebecca back in Texas. But her father did not approve of a carpenter with no land, and she chose to listen to him instead of her heart. Figured after that I was better off alone. Been drifting ever since, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. That sounds lonely, Nora said quietly. Sometimes it is, Graham admitted, but it is also simple. No expectations, no disappointments, just me and the horse and whatever work I can find. He stopped hammering and looked at her directly. At least that was what I told myself. These past few days, though, working on something that matters, having someone to talk to in the evenings, I am remembering what I have been missing. Nora's heart beat faster at his words, at the way he looked at her like she was something more than just a job or an obligation. She opened her mouth to respond, but Sarah chose that moment to wake up crying, and the spell was broken. Still, as she went to tend to the baby, Nora found herself smiling despite the interrupted moment. Something was growing between them, something fragile and new that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The second week brought the first real snowfall, fat flakes drifting down from a leaden sky. By then the cabin was mostly repaired, with a solid roof and a new door Graham had built from scratch. He had even managed to fix the damaged stove, and the cabin stayed warm and cozy while the snow accumulated outside. "Getting close to finished," Graham said one evening, and Nora felt her heart sink. She had known this moment was coming, known that eventually the repairs would be done and Graham would continue on his way to Arizona or wherever else he was heading. But the prospect of him leaving filled her with a dread she could not quite name. "You have done so much," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort. "More than I ever could have hoped for. The babies and I will be safe and warm this winter thanks to you." Graham set down the wood plane he had been using and looked at her seriously. "Nora, I have been thinking. You are going to need firewood cut, regular maintenance done, help with heavy tasks, and winter is long up here. It does not sit right with me, leaving you alone to handle everything." "What are you saying?" Nora asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am saying I could stay longer, through the winter at least." Graham seemed almost nervous, which was strange on a man usually so confident. "I could build a small lean-to off the side of the cabin, give myself a proper place to sleep. Keep the firewood stocked, handle repairs, maybe help with the babies sometimes so you can get proper rest. Come spring, if you want me gone, I will go. But until then, you would have help." Nora stared at him, her mind racing. It would be improper. A single man and a widow living in such close proximity. People would talk, but people were already talking, she was sure, and the alternative was facing the Utah winter alone with 2 infants. Beyond the practical considerations, though, she realized she did not want him to leave. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice and the comfort of having someone to share the burden with. More than that, she had started to care for him in ways that went beyond gratitude. "People will assume things," she said carefully, "about us, about why you are here." "Let them assume what they want," Graham said. "We will know the truth, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me. You would do that, stay here through the whole winter." Nora felt like she needed to understand his motivations, needed to know this was not just obligation driving him. Graham crossed the small space between them and knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Nora, I stopped here planning to spend a few days making sure you and the babies did not freeze. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being just about doing the right thing. I like being here. I like working on this cabin and talking to you in the evenings and hearing those babies fuss and settle. I like feeling useful and needed and part of something again." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "And I like you, more than I probably should given the circumstances, so yes, I want to stay, if you will have me." Nora's breath caught in her chest. She should say no. Should tell him it was too soon, that Thomas had been gone only 2 months and she had no business entertaining feelings for another man. Should protect her reputation and her dignity and send him away with thanks. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Yes, please stay." The smile that broke across Graham's face was like sunrise, and Nora felt her own lips curve in response. They stayed there for a moment, kneeling face to face in the lamplight, and Nora thought about how strange life was, how it could break your heart into pieces and then offer you something beautiful when you least expected it. Graham cleared his throat and stood, offering her his hand to help her up. "Right then. I will start on that lean-to tomorrow. We should probably go into town too, get some more supplies before the snow gets too deep. Maybe talk to the preacher or the sheriff, make it official that I am staying on as a hired hand. That might help with the talk." "I still cannot pay you," Nora reminded him. "Room and board is payment enough," Graham said. "Your cooking is a sight better than my trail food, and sleeping under a roof beats sleeping under stars when it is snowing. We will call it even." They went into Silver Reef 2 days later, Graham driving a borrowed wagon through the snow-covered landscape. The town was built in a narrow valley, huddled against the red sandstone cliffs that gave it its name. The main street was lined with buildings constructed from the local stone, and even on a cold November day, there was activity as miners came and went from the diggings. Nora held Samuel while Graham carried Sarah, and together they walked into the general store. The proprietor, a man named William Ashford, gave them a curious look as they entered. "Mrs. Kendall," he said with a nod. "Heard you had some trouble with fire. Sorry for your loss, both the recent and the not-so-recent." "Thank you, Mr. Ashford," Nora said. "This is Graham Morrison. He has been helping me repair the cabin." Ashford's gaze sharpened with interest as he looked Graham up and down. "That's so, mighty Christian of you, stranger." "Just doing what is right," Graham said evenly. "We need some supplies. Flour, beans, salt, coffee. Nails and some more tools if you have them. And some fabric and thread if you have got any. Mrs. Kendall needs to make proper winter clothes for the little ones." They spent an hour in the store, selecting supplies while Ashford made small talk that was clearly designed to extract information about their situation. Nora could see the curiosity in his eyes, the unspoken questions about who Graham was and what he was really doing at her cabin. As they were loading the wagon, Sheriff Thomas Brennan approached. He was a solid man in his 50s with gray streaking his dark hair and a star pinned to his coat. "Mrs. Kendall," he said politely, then turned to Graham. "I do not believe we have met. You new to Silver Reef?" "Just passing through originally," Graham said, shaking the offered hand. "Name is Graham Morrison. I have been helping Mrs. Kendall repair her cabin after the fire." "So I heard," Brennan said. His tone was not unfriendly, but there was a certain watchfulness in his expression. "Might I ask your intentions? Silver Reef is a decent town. We look after our own." "My intentions are to make sure a widow and her children do not freeze to death this winter," Graham said calmly. "I am a carpenter by trade. I will be staying through the cold months as a hired hand, doing repairs and maintenance. All perfectly respectable." Brennan looked between them for a long moment, then seemed to come to some conclusion. "All right, then. But understand that people will talk, and if there is any impropriety, I will hear about it." "There will not be," Nora said firmly, finding her voice. "Mr. Morrison has been nothing but respectful and helpful. He saved our lives, Sheriff. Whatever people want to say about it, that is the truth." Brennan's expression softened slightly. "I believe you, Mrs. Kendall, and I am glad you have help. Just wanted to make things clear is all." He tipped his hat. "You need anything, either of you, you let me know." As they drove back to the cabin, Nora felt the weight of the town's judgment settling on her shoulders. She knew how it looked, knew what people would assume. But Graham's steady presence beside her, his calm acceptance of the situation, made it easier to bear. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "What people will think," Graham shrugged. "I have been talked about before. I am more concerned about whether it bothers you. You have to live in this town. I am just passing through when spring comes." Nora considered that. "It does bother me," she admitted. "But not enough to make different choices. I have been so alone, Graham. These weeks with you here, having someone to share the burden with, it has reminded me what it feels like to not carry everything by myself. I am not willing to give that up just to satisfy the gossips." "Good," Graham said with satisfaction, "because I am not going anywhere." The lean-to took another week to complete, and when it was done, it was a snug little structure attached to the side of the cabin, with its own small stove and enough room for Graham's bedroll and supplies. He moved his things in on a clear, cold day in early December, and that night they sat together in the main cabin, watching the fire and listening to the wind outside. "Feels more permanent now," Nora said quietly. "You having your own space, like you really live here." "I do live here," Graham replied. "For now, anyway, for as long as you need me." "What if I need you beyond the winter?" The words slipped out before Nora could stop them, and she felt her cheeks heat. "I am sorry, I should not have said that." But Graham was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What if I need to stay beyond the winter? What then?" They stared at each other across the firelight, the unspoken thing between them suddenly very spoken indeed. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. It had been less than 3 months since Thomas died. She should not be having these feelings, should not be thinking about Graham Morrison as anything other than a helpful stranger. But she was. She was thinking about him all the time, noticing everything about him, imagining a future that was probably impossible. "It is too soon," she whispered. "People would be scandalized." "Probably," Graham agreed. "But that does not change how I feel." "How do you feel?" Nora asked, because she needed to hear him say it. Graham stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair. He took her hand carefully, like it was something precious. "I feel like I found something I did not know I was looking for. I feel like this cabin is more of a home than anywhere I have been in 10 years. I feel like when I look at you, I see a future I thought I would never have." He paused, his gray-green eyes searching hers. "I feel like I am falling in love with you, Nora Kendall, and I do not know what to do about it except tell you the truth and hope you do not send me away." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, but they were not sad tears. "I feel the same," she admitted, "and it terrifies me. Thomas has been gone such a short time. What kind of wife does that make me?" "It makes you human," Graham said gently. "It makes you someone who deserves to be happy again, someone who deserves to be loved and cared for. Thomas would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone out of loyalty to his memory." "How do you know what he would want?" Nora asked, but without heat. "Because if I loved you the way he must have, I would want you to live. I would want you to find joy again. I would want someone to take care of you and those babies, to give you the life I could not." Graham squeezed her hand. "I cannot replace him, Nora. I would never try, but I can offer you something new, something different, if you are willing." Nora looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses on his palm and the strength in his fingers. She thought about the long, empty years stretching ahead if she said no, about raising Samuel and Sarah alone, about never knowing what might have been. And she thought about how Graham made her laugh, how safe she felt when he was near, how the cabin felt warm not just from the fire but from his presence in it. "I am willing," she said finally, looking up to meet his eyes. "I do not know how this will work or what people will say, but I am willing to try. Because you are right. I'm falling in love with you too, and fighting it is only making both of us miserable." The smile that crossed Graham's face was brilliant, and before Nora quite knew what was happening, he had leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, a promise of things to come, and when they broke apart, Nora felt like she was glowing from the inside out. "We will take it slow," Graham promised. "No rushing, no scandalizing the whole town more than we already are. But Nora, I want to court you proper. I want to build something real with you. Will you let me?" "Yes," Nora said and kissed him again. The winter deepened, and the snow piled high around the cabin, but inside it was warm and full of life. Graham and Nora fell into a domestic routine that felt almost like a marriage, though they were careful to maintain the proprieties. He slept in his lean-to, she in the main cabin with the babies, but they spent their days together, working and talking and slowly building something between them that felt solid and true. Graham turned out to have a knack with the twins. He could soothe Samuel's colicky crying when nothing else worked, walking the floor with the baby against his shoulder, humming old trail songs in his rough voice. He made Sarah giggle with his funny faces, and both babies lit up when they saw him in the mornings. "You are good with them," Nora said one evening, watching him play with the twins while she cooked dinner. They were nearly 5 months old now, getting bigger and more alert every day. "They are good babies," Graham replied, making Sarah clutch at his finger. "Easy to love." "You do love them, do not you?" Nora asked, realizing it was true. Graham had not just stayed for her. He had grown attached to Samuel and Sarah too, caring for them like they were his own. "Of course I do," Graham said simply. "How could I not?" In late December, Graham rode into Silver Reef and came back with a small pine tree tied to his saddle. Nora laughed with delight when she saw it. "It is almost Christmas," Graham explained, hauling the tree inside. "Figured the babies are too young to appreciate it, but you are not. Thought we could make it festive in here." They decorated the tree with strings of dried berries and paper ornaments Graham cut from old newspapers, and Nora felt a rush of joy she had not expected to feel this year. On Christmas Eve, Graham presented her with a gift wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a beautiful carved cradle, sized perfectly for the twins to share, with their names carved into the headboard in flowing script. The wood was smooth as silk, polished to a warm glow, and the craftsmanship was exquisite. "Graham," Nora breathed, running her fingers over the carving. "This is beautiful. When did you make this?" "Been working on it in the evenings after you go to sleep," Graham said, looking pleased with her reaction. "Figured they deserved something special, something made with love." Nora set the cradle down carefully and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. For staying, for caring, for making this Christmas possible when I thought there would be no joy in it." Graham held her close, his hand stroking her hair. "Thank you for letting me stay, for giving me a reason to stop drifting, for making me feel like I matter." "You do matter," Nora said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "You matter so much, Graham Morrison, to me, to Samuel and Sarah. You matter." They stood there holding each other while the firelight flickered and the Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, and Nora felt more content than she had in months. Maybe more content than she had ever felt, even with Thomas, though she felt guilty thinking it. Graham must have sensed her conflict because he said quietly, "It is all right to be happy, Nora. It does not diminish what you had before. Love does not work that way." "How did you get so wise?" she asked with a shaky laugh. "Hard living and paying attention," Graham replied with a small smile. "Now come on. Let us get those babies settled in their new cradle and you settled in for the night. Tomorrow is Christmas and I am going to make you a breakfast fit for a queen." "Just so long as it does not involve hardtack," Nora teased, and Graham laughed. the sound filling the cabin with warmth. The new year came in cold and bright, and with it came change. One morning in mid-January, Nora woke to the sound of horses outside and voices calling her name. She wrapped herself in a shawl and opened the door to find Sheriff Brennan standing there with two other men she did not recognize. "Mrs. Kendall," Brennan said, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to disturb you so early. These men say they are family of your late husband. They have come from Missouri." Nora's blood ran cold. The two men stepped forward, and she recognized them from the single time she had met them years ago at her wedding. Thomas's older brothers, Jacob and Martin Kendall. They had barely spoken to her then, their disapproval clear in every line of their faces. "Gentlemen," she said warily, "what brings you to Utah Territory?" Jacob, the older of the two, had the same dark hair as Thomas but none of his gentle nature. "We received word of Thomas's passing some months ago. We came as soon as we could arrange our affairs." "That was kind of you," Nora said, though she did not feel kind about their arrival. "Though I am afraid you have had a long journey for nothing. The funeral was weeks ago." "We are not here for the funeral," Martin said bluntly. He was shorter than his brother, stockier, with cold eyes. "We are here for our nephews." "Nephew and niece," Nora corrected automatically, feeling panic rising in her chest. "And what do you mean you are here for them?" "We mean we are taking them back to Missouri," Jacob said. "You cannot provide for them properly, a widow alone with no income. They will have a better life with us, with family who can give them what they need." "They have what they need," Nora said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "They have their mother. They have a home. You cannot just take them." "Actually, we can," Martin said. "We spoke to a lawyer before we came. As the closest male relatives, we have the legal right to take custody of the children if we deem the mother unfit. And you, living out here in a half-burned cabin with some drifter, certainly seem unfit to us." Graham appeared then, stepping out of his lean-to already dressed, clearly having heard the confrontation. "The cabin is fully repaired," he said coldly. "And Mrs. Kendall is an excellent mother. Those babies are healthy and well cared for." "And who are you?" Jacob asked, looking Graham up and down with disdain. "Graham Morrison. I have been helping Mrs. Kendall with repairs and maintenance through the winter." "I bet you have," Martin said with an ugly insinuation in his tone. "Does not look good, does it? Widow carrying on with a stranger while her husband is barely cold in the ground." "Watch your mouth," Graham said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "You do not know anything about the situation here." "We know enough," Jacob said. "We know our brother's children deserve better than this." "We are taking them, Mrs. Kendall. You can cooperate and make this easy, or we can involve the law and make it hard. Your choice." Nora felt the world tilting under her feet. They could not take her babies. They could not. But what leverage did she have? She was a widow with no income, living with a man she was not married to. A judge might very well side with them. "Give me time," she said desperately. "Just a few days to think, to arrange things." "We will give you until tomorrow morning," Jacob said. "We are staying at the hotel in Silver Reef. Have the children ready and packed. We will collect them at dawn." They rode away, leaving Nora standing in the snow feeling like her heart had been ripped from her chest. Graham was beside her in an instant, his arm around her shoulders as her knees buckled. "They cannot take them," she sobbed. "Graham, I cannot lose my babies, I cannot." "You will not," Graham said fiercely. "I promise you, Nora, we will figure something out." They spent the morning trying to come up with solutions. They could run, take the babies, and leave in the night, but where would they go? How would they survive? Graham did not have enough money for them all to get far, and traveling in winter with infants was dangerous even under the best circumstances. They could fight it in court, but that took time and money they did not have. And the truth was, a judge might well decide that the children would be better off with established family than with a poor widow. It was Graham who finally said what they were both thinking. There is one way to stop them. If you were not a widow anymore. If you were married, they would have no legal standing. Nora looked up at him, her heart pounding. Are you saying? Marry me, Graham said. Today, right now, we will ride into Silver Reef, find the preacher, and make it legal. Then tomorrow, when they come, you will not be a poor widow living with a drifter. You will be a married woman with a husband who can provide for his family. They will have no grounds to take the children. That is not how I wanted this to happen, Nora said, even as hope flared in her chest. I wanted us to have time to do it right. We will have all the time in the world after, Graham said. But right now, those babies need protecting, and this is how we do it. Nora, I want to marry you anyway. We have been heading in this direction since the day I arrived. We are just moving the timeline up a bit. Are you sure? Nora asked. This is a big step, Graham. You would be taking on not just me but 2 babies who are not your blood. You would be tied to this place, to this life. I am already tied to it, Graham said simply. I love you. I love those babies. I want this life with you, want it more than anything I have ever wanted. So yes, I am sure. The question is, are you? Nora looked through the cabin door at Samuel and Sarah sleeping in their beautiful carved cradle. She thought about Thomas, about the love they had shared and the life they had built. And she knew with absolute certainty that he would want this. He would want his children protected. He would want her to be happy. He would want someone to love them all the way Graham did. Yes, she said. Yes, I am sure. Let us get married. They bundled up the babies and rode into Silver Reef through the snow, going straight to the small church at the edge of town. The preacher, Reverend Samuel Clark, was surprised to see them but listened carefully as Graham explained the situation. You want me to marry you today, he said slowly, to prevent the Kendall brothers from taking the children. That is part of it, Graham admitted, but it is not the only reason. I love Nora. I want to spend my life with her. The circumstances are just pushing up our timeline. Reverend Clark looked at Nora. Is this what you want, Mrs. Kendall? Or are you just feeling pressured? I want this, Nora said firmly. Graham has been more of a husband to me these past months than most women ever find. He loves my children like they are his own. He makes me happy. I want to marry him. The Reverend nodded slowly. Then I suppose we should get on with it. Let me fetch my wife to serve as witness. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the small church with just the Reverend, his wife, and the babies present. Nora wore the same dress she had been wearing when Graham first rode up to her burned cabin, and Graham wore his work clothes, and it was perfect. When Reverend Clark pronounced them man and wife, Graham kissed her gently, sweetly, and Nora felt something settle in her soul. This was right. Whatever the circumstances that pushed them here, this was exactly what was supposed to happen. They registered the marriage at the county office and rode back to the cabin as the sun was setting. That night they sat together by the fire, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison now, planning what they would say to Jacob and Martin in the morning. They are going to be furious, Nora said. Let them be, Graham replied. They have no power here anymore. You are my wife. Samuel and Sarah are my children now, legally. They cannot touch them. Your children, Nora repeated softly. Just like that, Graham confirmed. I will petition to adopt them formally come spring, make it official in every way. But for now, legally speaking, they have a father again. And I intend to be the best father I can be. Nora leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder under her cheek. I never expected this, she admitted. When you rode up to that burned cabin, I never imagined we would end up here. Neither did I, Graham said, but I am glad we did. This is where I was supposed to be all along. I just did not know it until I found you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers until the babies woke hungry and Nora went to feed them. Later, much later, they lay together in the cabin for the first time as husband and wife, and when Graham held her, Nora felt like all the broken pieces of her life had finally been put back together into something whole and good. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the sound of horses. Jacob and Martin Kendall rode up just after dawn, as promised, but this time when they knocked on the door, it was Graham who opened it, standing tall and solid in the doorway. "Gentlemen," he said coldly, "you are early." "We have come for the children," Jacob said. "Is Mrs. Kendall ready?" "There is no Mrs. Kendall anymore," Graham said with satisfaction. "Only Mrs. Morrison. Nora and I were married yesterday. Those children have a father now, and you have no legal grounds to take them." The shock on their faces would have been funny under other circumstances. Martin sputtered, his face turning red. "You cannot possibly think that changes anything. That is clearly a marriage of convenience, undertaken to thwart our legitimate claim." "Our claim is more legitimate," Graham said. "I am their legal father now. They are being raised in a good home by two parents who love them. Any judge in the territory would side with us, and you know it." "This is ridiculous," Jacob said angrily. "You are a drifter, a nobody. You probably married her to get your hands on Thomas's property." "Thomas's property is a burned cabin on a patch of poor land," Nora said, appearing beside Graham with Samuel in her arms. "There is nothing here worth scheming for except the family we are building, and that is not yours to take." "Our brother deserved better than this," Martin said bitterly. "Deserved a wife who would honor his memory, not jump into bed with the first stranger who came along. Your brother deserved a family who cared enough to visit while he was alive," Nora shot back, her voice shaking with anger. "You never came, never wrote, never showed the slightest interest in Thomas or his children until you decided you could use them to make yourselves look respectable back in Missouri. Well, I will not let you. These are my children, mine and Graham's now, and you will not take them." There was a long, tense silence. Finally, Jacob said, "We could still fight this, take it to court." "You could," Sheriff Brennan said, riding up on his horse. He must have been watching from a distance. "But you would lose, and you would waste a lot of money doing it. The law is clear on this. Mrs. Morrison is married with a husband who can provide. The children stay with their mother. Best you head back to Missouri and save yourselves the embarrassment." The Kendall brothers looked between Brennan, Graham, and Nora and seemed to realize they were beaten. Jacob's face was tight with anger, but he jerked his horse's head around without another word. Martin followed, and they rode away through the snow without looking back. Nora sagged against Graham in relief, and he wrapped his free arm around her, Sarah cradled in his other arm. "It is over," he said quietly. "They are gone. The babies are safe. We are safe," Nora corrected, looking up at him. "All of us. Thanks to you." "Thanks to us," Graham said. "We are a family now, Nora, and nobody is going to take that away." Sheriff Brennan tipped his hat to them. "Congratulations on the marriage," he said, something almost like approval in his voice. "You two did right by those babies. Town will come around to seeing that given time." As the sheriff rode away, Graham and Nora stood in the doorway of their cabin, holding the babies between them, and looked out at the snow-covered landscape. The sun was rising over the red rocks, painting everything gold and pink, and it felt like the start of something new and precious. "Come on," Graham said finally. "Let us go inside. I promised you I would make breakfast fit for a queen, and I intend to deliver." They went inside together, closing the door on the cold and the threat and the past, ready to begin their life as a real family. The months that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. As the snow melted and spring crept back into the Utah territory, the cabin that had once been a symbol of loss and tragedy transformed into a real home. Graham built furniture in the evenings, a proper table and chairs, shelves for their sparse belongings, a rocking chair that Nora used to nurse the babies. He expanded the vegetable garden Thomas had started, preparing the soil for planting. The town of Silver Reef slowly accepted their unusual courtship and hasty marriage. It helped that Graham made himself useful, taking carpentry jobs for people who needed repairs or new construction. He was skilled and fair in his pricing, and gradually people stopped seeing him as an outsider taking advantage of a widow, and started seeing him as a hard-working man who had done right by his family. Nora made friends with some of the other mothers in town, women who brought their children to play with Samuel and Sarah, as the twins grew more active and alert. She joined the Church Ladies' Society and helped with community suppers, reclaiming a social life she had lost in the dark months of Thomas's illness and death. But the best moments were still the quiet evenings at home, when Graham would play with the babies while Nora cooked, and they would talk about their days and their dreams for the future. Samuel took his first steps holding onto Graham's fingers, and Sarah said her first word, which sounded remarkably like Papa, and Graham's eyes had filled with tears of joy. "I never thought I would have this," he admitted that night, holding Nora close in their bed. "A real home, a family. It feels almost too good to be true." "It is true," Nora assured him. "You are not going to wake up and find it was all a dream. We are yours, Graham, me and the babies, completely and forever." "Forever," Graham repeated and kissed her like a man who had found everything he ever wanted. In June, Graham formally adopted Samuel and Sarah in the county courthouse. Nora held the babies while Graham signed the papers that made him their legal father in every way. The clerk seemed touched by the proceedings, and afterward they celebrated with a picnic by the creek, just the four of them, watching the water flow and the babies chase butterflies through the grass. "Samuel Morrison and Sarah Morrison," Graham said, trying out the names. "Sounds right, does not it?" "It sounds perfect," Nora agreed. That summer they worked together to expand the cabin, adding another room for when the twins got older and needed their own space. Graham taught Nora more about carpentry, and she proved to have a knack for it, her hands steady and her measurements precise. "You are a natural," Graham said one afternoon, watching her nail boards together for the new room's frame. "Give it a few years and you will be better than me." "Impossible," Nora teased, "but I like learning. I like that we build things together." "We are good partners," Graham agreed. In everything. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple, Nora reached for Graham's hand. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, "about the future." "What about it?" Graham asked, lacing his fingers through hers. "Samuel and Sarah are almost a year old now. They are getting big, becoming their own little people." Nora paused, gathering her courage. "I want more children, Graham." "Your children. I want to give you a baby of your own blood, not just the ones you inherited." Graham turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Nora, you know I love Samuel and Sarah like they are mine. There is no difference in my heart." "I know that," Nora said quickly. "And that is why I want this. Because you are such a wonderful father, and it seems unfair that you should not have the chance to hold your own baby, to see your features reflected in a little face." Graham was quiet for a long moment, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "Are you sure? Having babies is not easy. I do not want you taking risks if you are not ready." "I am ready," Nora said firmly. "I am happy, Graham, happier than I have ever been, and I want to build something more with you. I want to see what a child of ours would be like, what they would grow into." A slow smile spread across Graham's face, bright and joyful. "Then yes. God, yes. I would love that, Nora. I would love nothing more than to have a baby with you." They kissed there on the porch as the desert darkened around them, and Nora felt a surge of hope and excitement for what was to come. By September, Nora's suspicions were confirmed. She was expecting, due sometime in the spring. Graham was overjoyed, almost comically solicitous, insisting she rest more and not lift heavy things. Nora bore his fussing with good humor, secretly pleased by how much he cared. The twins were walking now, getting into everything, and Nora spent her days chasing after two toddlers while her belly grew. Graham took on more carpentry work to save money for the new baby, but he was always home for dinner, always there to help with bedtime, always ready to rub Nora's swollen feet and listen to her talk about her day. "You know," Nora said one evening in December as they decorated another Christmas tree, "a year ago we were just beginning. You had just decided to stay through the winter. I could not have imagined we would be here now. Where would you have imagined we would be?" Graham asked, lifting Samuel up to hang an ornament on a high branch. "I do not know. Nowhere as good as this." Nora smiled, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "You have given me everything, Graham. A home, security, love. Another chance at happiness." "You gave me the same," Graham said seriously. "More even. You gave me purpose. You made me believe I was worth something beyond just drifting from job to job. You made me a husband and a father. You made me whole." They stood together in the lamplight, Sarah asleep in Nora's arms, Samuel drowsing against Graham's shoulder, and Nora thought about how far they had come from that first desperate day. The burned cabin was long gone, replaced by a solid home. The scared widow and the drifting cowboy had become a family, rooted and strong. "I love you," she said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever brought you to me, whatever twist of fate put you on that road at that moment, I am grateful for it every single day." "I love you too," Graham said. "Always will." Winter passed more easily this year, with plenty of firewood and food stored up and the cabin warm and tight. The twins celebrated their first birthday in January, and Graham made them each a toy horse carved from wood, painted with loving detail. They played with the horses constantly, galloping them across the floor while making enthusiastic neighing sounds. As Nora's due date approached, Graham became more nervous. He arranged for one of the town women, a midwife named Agnes Thornton, to be on call when the time came. He made sure they had all the supplies they might need, prepared the cabin obsessively, and generally drove Nora slightly crazy with his worry. "Graham," she finally said in early April when she was huge and uncomfortable and ready to have this baby already, "women have been giving birth since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "Your first labor was long and hard," Graham said. "You told me. 30 hours with the twins. I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly." Nora's expression softened at the genuine concern in his voice. She reached up to cup his cheek. "I know you are worried, but Agnes is experienced and capable, and you will be right here. That makes all the difference. I am not alone this time." "You will never be alone again," Graham promised. "Not as long as I am breathing." The baby came on a warm April evening when the desert was blooming with wildflowers. Nora's labor started just after dinner, and Graham immediately rode for Agnes while Nora stayed home with a neighbor woman watching the twins. By the time they returned, the contractions were coming hard and fast. This labor was mercifully shorter than her first, only 8 hours from start to finish. Graham stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, and when the baby finally arrived with a lusty cry, tears were streaming down his face. "It is a boy," Agnes announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket. A big, healthy boy. She placed the baby in Nora's arms, and Nora looked down at her son with wonder. He had Graham's nose and chin, her dark hair, and eyes that would probably end up somewhere between their two colors. He was perfect. "Your son," she said, looking up at Graham. "Our son." Graham reached out with a shaking hand to touch the baby's tiny fist, and the infant immediately grasped his finger. "Hello there, little one," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am your papa. I have been waiting to meet you." They named him Thomas, after Nora's first husband, because it felt right to honor the man who had given her Samuel and Sarah. Graham agreed without hesitation, understanding the importance of keeping that connection alive. "Thomas Morrison," Graham said, testing the name. "Welcome to the family, Tommy." The twins were fascinated by their baby brother, wanting to touch him and look at him constantly. Samuel tried to share his toy horse, putting it next to the baby's cradle, and Sarah insisted on singing to him, her toddler voice high and sweet and completely off-key. Graham and Nora watched their 3 children together and felt their happiness overflow. Life settled into a new rhythm with 3 young children in the house. Nora's days were full of nursing and diaper changes and breaking up toddler squabbles. Graham worked when he could, but he was home as much as possible, taking on the bulk of the cooking and cleaning so Nora could focus on the baby. "You do not have to do all this," Nora protested one evening, watching him scrub dishes while Tommy nursed. "I can manage." "I know you can," Graham said, "but you do not have to. We are partners, remember? That means we share everything, the good and the hard." "When did I get so lucky?" Nora wondered aloud. "Pretty sure I am the lucky one," Graham replied with a grin. "I get to come home to this every day. 3 beautiful children and the woman I love. Cannot imagine anything better." Tommy grew quickly, a happy baby with an easy temperament. By summer he was smiling and cooing, and by fall he was sitting up and grabbing for everything within reach. Samuel and Sarah adored him, including him in their games as much as a baby could be included, and the cabin rang with laughter and noise. Silver Reef continued to prosper, the silver mines producing steady wealth. Graham's carpentry business grew as well, and by the time Tommy was a year old, they had saved enough money to buy a proper piece of land with water rights and room for expansion. "We could have a real ranch," Graham said one evening, showing Nora the property deed. "Keep some cattle, horses. Raise the children with animals and open space. Make a real future here. You want to stay permanently?" Nora asked. "I thought you were a drifter at heart." "I was," Graham admitted. "But that was before I found something worth staying for. This is home now, Nora. You and the children. Silver Reef, all of it. I do not want to go anywhere else." "Then let us buy it," Nora said decisively. "Let us build our future here." They purchased the land and spent the next year building a new house on it, larger than the cabin, with separate bedrooms for the children, and a big kitchen where the family could gather. Graham designed it himself, incorporating everything they had learned from living in the smaller space, and Nora helped with the construction as much as she could with 3 small children underfoot. The day they moved into the new house was a celebration. Their neighbors came to help transport their belongings and brought food for a housewarming party. Sheriff Brennan was there, as was Reverend Clark and his wife. Even William Ashford from the general store came, bringing gifts for the children. "You have done well for yourselves," Brennan said, shaking Graham's hand. "When you first showed up here, I had my doubts, but you proved me wrong. You are a good man, Morrison. This town is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Graham said, watching Nora across the room laughing with Sarah on her hip and Tommy in her arms while Samuel tugged on her skirt. "I found everything I ever needed right here." That night, after the party was over and the children were asleep in their new rooms, Graham and Nora stood on the porch of their new house and looked out at their land stretching away in the moonlight. "You ever think about that first day?" Nora asked. "When you rode up and found me in that burned cabin?" "All the time," Graham admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past. I almost did, you know. Thought it was not my business, that I should not get involved." "What changed your mind?" Nora had never asked before. Graham was quiet for a moment. "I saw you through the gap in the wall, saw you sitting there with those babies, looking so alone and so determined not to give up. And I thought about Grace, about how nobody had been there for her when she needed help. I thought maybe this was my chance to make up for that somehow." "I am glad you stopped," Nora said softly. "I am glad you decided we were worth helping." "You were always worth it," Graham said. "It just took me about 5 minutes to realize you were also worth staying for. Worth building a life with, worth loving." They stood together in the darkness, comfortable in their silence, until Nora said, "I want to have another baby." Graham looked at her in surprise. "Already? Tommy is barely a year old." "I know, but I am 27 years old, Graham. I want a big family, and we do not have unlimited time to build it." Nora smiled up at him. "I want our house filled with children and laughter. I want to give Samuel and Sarah and Tommy siblings to grow up with. I want to see what other combinations of you and me the world will create." "You make it sound like some kind of experiment," Graham teased, but his eyes were warm. "Maybe it is," Nora said. "The best kind of experiment, so what do you say?" "I say yes," Graham replied, pulling her close. "I say always yes to you." Their second son together, Gabriel, was born the following spring, another easy labor that had Agnes Thornton declaring Nora was built for having babies. Gabriel had Nora's nose and Graham's eyes, and he was louder than Tommy had been, letting his presence be known from the start. "This one is going to keep us on our toes," Graham predicted, walking the floor with the crying newborn at 2 in the morning. "They all do," Nora said sleepily from the bed, "but they are worth it." Gabriel did indeed keep them busy, but he also brought new joy into the house. Samuel and Sarah were 4 now, old enough to actually help with the babies, fetching diapers and entertaining them with their antics. Tommy toddled around trying to keep up with his older siblings, and Gabriel watched it all from his cradle with wide, interested eyes. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing changes and growth. Graham's reputation as a skilled carpenter spread beyond Silver Reef, and he had more work than he could handle. He took on an apprentice, a young man from town named David, and taught him the trade the way his own father had taught him. Nora managed the household and the children with capable efficiency, but she also found time to start a small business of her own, making and selling preserves and baked goods in town. The extra income was nice, but more than that, she enjoyed having something that was hers, a skill and a contribution beyond motherhood. When Gabriel was 2, their first daughter together arrived. They named her Grace, after Graham's sister, and she was the image of Nora as a baby according to the tintype photographs Nora's mother had left her. Grace was a calm child, content to watch the world from her cradle, smiling at everyone who came near. "We are going to need a bigger house," Graham joked when Grace was 6 months old. They had 6 children now, ranging from Samuel and Sarah at 6 years old down to baby Grace, and the house that had seemed so spacious when they built it was starting to feel crowded. "Or we could be done having children," Nora suggested, though her tone was playful rather than serious. "Could," Graham agreed. "Or we could add another wing to the house and see what happens." "You are incorrigible," Nora said, but she was smiling. They did add another wing, creating more bedrooms and a larger common area. The ranch was prospering, with a small herd of cattle and several horses, and they had hired help to manage the animals and the land. Graham still took carpentry jobs occasionally, but more often he worked on their own property, building barns and fences and all the infrastructure a working ranch needed. Samuel and Sarah started school in Silver Reef, walking to town each morning with their lunch pails and returning in the afternoon full of stories about what they had learned. They were bright children, curious and energetic, and watching them grow was one of Graham's greatest joys. "Do you ever think about their birth father?" Graham asked Nora one evening as they watched the twins practice their letters at the table. "About Thomas, sometimes," Nora admitted. "I want them to know about him, to understand where they came from. But you are their father, Graham. You are the one who has raised them, taught them, loved them every day of their lives. That is what matters." "I hope they see it that way," Graham said quietly. "I hope they do not grow up feeling like I am not really their father because we do not share blood." "They will not," Nora said firmly. "Because we will make sure they understand that family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up, who stays, who loves you no matter what. And that is you." When the twins were 8, Sarah asked one evening at dinner, "Papa, tell us about how you met Mama." Graham and Nora exchanged glances, and Graham said, "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Samuel said. "How did you find us? Why did you stay?" So Graham told them the story, with Nora filling in details he missed. He told them about riding up to a burned cabin and finding a woman with 2 tiny babies, about deciding to stop and help, about falling in love with their mother and their family and the life they could build together. "But what about our first father?" Sarah asked. "The one who died." "His name was Thomas," Nora said gently. "Thomas Kendall. He was a good man who loved me very much, and he would have loved you both more than anything if he had lived to see you grow up. He was a miner, hardworking and kind, and he built the cabin where we lived before we built this house." "Did Papa Graham know him?" Samuel asked. "No," Graham said. "I never had the chance to meet him, but I wish I had. I would have liked to shake his hand, to tell him that his children are wonderful and I am honored to raise them." "You are our real Papa, though," Sarah said firmly. "You are the one we remember." "I am your real Papa," Graham agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And you too are my real children, just as much as Tommy and Gabriel and Grace. Never doubt that." The conversation seemed to satisfy them, and they went back to their dinner chattering about other things. But that night, when the children were in bed, Nora held Graham close and said, "You handled that perfectly." "I just told them the truth," Graham said. "That is all any of us can do." The ranch continued to grow and prosper through the 1880s. Silver Reef's boom eventually began to fade as the silver played out, but by then, Graham and Nora had diversified enough that they were not dependent on the mining economy. They raised cattle and horses, sold Graham's carpentry work, and Nora's preserves became famous enough that she was shipping them to stores across Utah Territory. Their 7th child, a son they named Henry, arrived when Grace was 3, and their 8th, a daughter named Margaret, came 2 years after that. 8 children in total, a house full of love and chaos and joy. The older ones helped with the younger ones, and they all pitched in with the ranch work as they got older. Samuel showed a talent for working with horses and took over training the colts as he entered his teenage years. Sarah had her mother's head for business and started keeping the ranch books when she was just 12. Tracking expenses and profits with meticulous care. Tommy followed in Graham's footsteps, showing an early interest in carpentry and spending every spare moment in the workshop. Gabriel wanted to be a cowboy, riding the range and working the cattle. Grace was gentle and nurturing, the peacemaker among her siblings. Henry was the adventurer, always exploring and getting into scrapes. Margaret, the baby, was spoiled by everyone and ruled the household with her charm. "We made some beautiful children," Nora said one evening, watching them all gathered around the dinner table, talking and laughing and teasing each other. "We made a beautiful family," Graham corrected. "I never imagined I would be this blessed." "Neither did I," Nora admitted. "When I was sitting in that burned cabin with the twins, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend whatever years I had left just trying to survive, to keep them alive. I never dreamed I would have all this." "Good thing I am stubborn and did not ride past," Graham said with a grin. "Good thing you saw something worth stopping for," Nora replied. By 1890, Samuel and Sarah were 16, young adults helping to run the ranch. Graham and Nora were in their mid-30s, still young enough to manage the physical demands of ranch life, but old enough to appreciate the stability they had built. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, difficult births and childhood illnesses, all the challenges that came with building a life in the Utah Territory. Through it all, their love had deepened and strengthened. They were not just husband and wife, but true partners in every sense of the word, sharing the work and the decisions and the dreams for their family's future. One spring evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the red rocks, their children playing in the yard, Graham reached for Nora's hand. "You remember I told you once that I was a drifter, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots?" he asked. "I remember," Nora said. "I lied," Graham said. "Or rather, I did not understand myself. I was not a drifter because I liked moving around. I was a drifter because I had not found anything worth staying for. But the moment I saw you in that burned cabin, something in me recognized that my drifting was done. I had found my home." "And have you regretted it?" Nora asked, though she knew the answer. "Not for one single second," Graham said firmly. "Every choice I made that led me here, every hard year and every mile traveled, it was all worth it to end up in this place with you and our children. This is the life I was meant to have." "This is the life we were meant to have," Nora corrected gently. "Together." They sat in comfortable silence as the desert cooled, and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. In the yard, Samuel was teaching Tommy to throw a rope while Sarah refereed an argument between Gabriel and Henry. Grace had baby Margaret on her lap, pointing out constellations, and from inside the house came the smell of bread baking, left over from that afternoon's work. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special or remarkable, and yet it was everything. It was the life they had built together from ashes and hope, from a chance meeting and a decision to stay. It was proof that love could grow in the hardest soil, that family could be created as well as born, that home was not a place, but the people who surrounded you. Graham pulled Nora close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched their children play as darkness fell gently over the Utah Territory. Their story had started with a burned cabin and 2 crying babies and a cowboy who made the choice to stop and help. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, something bigger and richer than any dream. And as the years continued to roll past, as children grew and eventually started families of their own, as Graham's hair turned gray and Nora's hands showed the marks of a lifetime of work, they never forgot that first moment. They told the story to their grandchildren, about how Grandpa Graham had ridden up to find Grandma Nora in the ruins of her home and decided to rebuild it, and in doing so rebuilt her life and his own. They lived long lives, Graham and Nora Morrison, surrounded by the family they had created together. When Graham finally passed away at the age of 78, his wife and 8 children and 23 grandchildren gathered around him, and his last words were, "I am glad I stopped." Nora lived 3 more years without him, cared for lovingly by her children, and when she joined him in the Silver Reef Cemetery, they buried her beside him under a headstone that read, "Together they built a home from ashes and love from ruins." Their ranch continued on through the generations, managed first by Samuel and then by his children, a Morrison legacy in the Utah Territory that traced its origins back to a burned cabin, 2 babies, and a cowboy who stayed. The cabin where it all began was long gone, replaced by the larger house and then eventually by an even larger ranch house as the family grew. But the foundation stones remained, and the Morrison descendants made sure every generation knew the story of how it started, how one act of compassion and one decision to stay had created a family dynasty that endured for more than a century. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right across the desert, people swore they could hear laughter from that old foundation, the sound of children playing and a woman singing, and a man's deep voice telling stories, all the echoes of a love that had transformed a tragedy into a triumph, that had proven the power of choosing to stay when it would have been easier to ride away. That was the legacy of Graham and Nora Morrison, a love story born in the hardest of circumstances, nurtured through dedication and partnership, and flowering into something that lasted well beyond their own lifetimes. It was a testament to the truth that family was built not just through blood but through choice, through showing up day after day, through the simple radical act of loving someone and refusing to leave them to face the world alone. And it all started because a cowboy on a buckskin horse decided to stop at a burned cabin where a woman and 2 babies needed help, and then decided to stay long enough to rebuild it, and then decided to never leave at all. That was their story, and it was a good one, the kind that people told around fires on winter nights, the kind that reminded listeners that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that hope could grow from ashes, and that sometimes the best thing a person could do was simply choose to stay. The end.